I have already made numerous videos detailing extinct birds of prey and owls, including numerous species that seem to be mostly unknown to many people. However, considering how diverse this family of birds have been throughout the course of history, and that numerous species are still being recognised even to this day, particularly in the case of species referred to ancient fossils, there are still many more species of extinct raptors that I can cover in yet another video. So, from two fossil species that might represent the smallest extinct bird of prey and owl species known to live, as well as among the earliest of their kind known to science, to a recently described species of vulture that roamed the Australian outback during the Ice Age, here's another 10 extinct birds of prey and owls you've never heard of. Primoptynx is a species of extinct owl that lived in North America during the Eocene epoch, around 55 million years ago, which is not that long after the death of the non-avian dinosaurs, at least geologically speaking. It was only recently described in 2020 based on a partial skeleton found in Wyoming. This fossil shows clearly that this was quite a large species of owl, standing around 60 centimeters tall in life, which is interesting considering that most mammals and birds at the time were quite small, while this aerial hunter was comparable in size to some of the larger species of owl alive today, for instance the snowy owl, a large species found in the northern hemisphere. Just like modern larger owl species, Primoptynx was armed with especially large and powerful feet, indicating it was a rapacious hunter that could tackle quite large prey items in relation to its size. In modern owl species, however, the talons on all of their toes are approximately the same size, whereas in this extinct owl, the talons on the second and hind toes of both feet were unusually enlarged, more like those seen on the feet of hawks and eagles, rather than most modern owl species. It is therefore theorized that this owl would have dispatched its prey using its feet in a much more hawk-like manner compared to what is seen in modern larger owls today. Although their taloned feet are still their primary physical weapons, modern owls are also frequently observed using their sharp beak to bite at the head and neck of their prey in order to dispatch it, especially with smaller prey once it's in their clutches, though it is believed that Primoptynx may not have engaged in this behaviour so much, instead dispatching and then dismembering its prey in a more hawk-like manner. At the time, the area in which Primoptynx lived was inhabited by various other small and strange creatures, including various rodents, tree-dwelling early primates, as well as early horses the size of spaniels, and it's possible that Primoptynx may have hunted many of these animals, believed to be able to carry prey as large as a small rabbit. Oraristrix is yet another species of extinct owl hailing from North America, though from a much more recent period in Earth's history, the Pleistocene epoch to be precise. Oraristrix brea, also known as the La Brea owl, is in reference to the fact that many of this bird's remains have been found in the La Brea tar pits in California, a famous location containing many prehistoric animal remains as mentioned in previous videos, where a wide range of animals and plants became stuck in this naturally occurring bed of tar and became preserved for thousands of years. Oraristrix has also been found in other locations in North America, including in the upper Pleistocene asphalt deposits of the Carpinteria, also in California, as well as a few other locations in the southwestern United States and into Mexico, making it quite the widespread species alongside a few other smaller species of extinct owls. The La Brea owl was a large species, comparable to the largest owls alive today in size, though it had a comparatively more slender build and longer legs in proportion to its body, suggesting that it spent more time on or near the ground compared to other species, preferring open plain habitats than forested ones. Not much information or research has been published about this particular owl's dietary biology, so what kind of prey this owl actually hunted in life is open to speculation. Some paleo-art depictions, including this one, portray the La Brea owl as a potential fish-eating species. There are actually a number of species of owl alive today that have taken to hunting fish as a large part of their diet, most notably the Pell's fishing owl, which lives in modern-day Africa, and the huge Blakiston's fish owl from Asia, which is also one of the largest owl species alive in the world today. Fish owl species like these tend to be large in size and have proportionally long legs in relation to their body, using their especially large and powerful feet and talons to seize fish, which they catch either by plunging directly into the water talons first, or by landing on the side of a river and snatching prey as it travels past. With some physical similarities with these modern owl species, and the fact that the La Brea owl lived alongside various waterways in the open plains in which it inhabited, it's not entirely unreasonable that this species may have indulged in hunting fish every now and again, but exactly how specialised this bird was for this kind of hunting technique or another different one still seems to be open for interpretation. Dryornis is an extinct species of gigantic New World vulture originating from Argentina. Also simply referred to as the Argentine vulture, Dryornis, whose name translates to tree bird, was first described in 1891 and is believed to have lived between the early Miocene and early Pliocene epochs, between 23 and 3.8 million years ago. Dryornis is currently recognised as being the largest known cathartiform except for the vulturine family known as Teratorns, a group that includes the infamous Argentavis. It may have had a wingspan reaching over 4 meters or more across, and it weighed a whopping 26 kilograms. For context, the largest bird of prey alive today, and also a potential close relative of this giant, the Andean condor, usually has a wingspan reaching over 3.2 meters across and weighing between 11 to 15 kilograms, making Dryornis an extra half the size of even this great bird. Just like these modern condors and vultures, Dryornis would have mostly been a scavenger in life and would have likely behaved in much the same manner as well, soaring over great distances on its gigantic wings, scanning the ground for dead animals to feed on. Its ecosystem was home to a range of unique species, including gigantic armadillo relatives, carnivorous marsupials, and other mammals including Chapel melania, a relative of modern-day raccoons, the size of a black bear. Based on the behaviour of modern-day vulture and condor species, it seems to be almost certain that Dryornis would have used its huge size and aggression to dominate and drive away smaller mammalian competitors on a carcass. Though it is also possible that alongside other giant vulture species in South America, including the aforementioned Argentavis, Dryornis may have also been an occasional predator of very small animals as well. Ogygoptynx is perhaps the oldest known owl species known in the fossil record, living during the Paleocene epoch, around 57 million years ago. It is known from a single fossil located in Colorado in the USA, and is only known from a single species, Ogygoptynx wetmori. This species lived at a time where the earth was covered mostly with forest, and small animals were abundant, especially on the ground, in the wake of the dinosaurs' extinction. With so much prey running around, particularly in the form of small mammals and reptiles, it's no doubt that this particular species, and eventually its progeny, were specifically adapted to take advantage of this ecological niche, which was now available for them to fulfill. The smallest known species of diurnal raptor alive today are the black-thighed and collared falconets. These birds, the tiniest of all the falcon family, are barely the size of a sparrow, scarcely weighing heavier than 55 grams and having a body less than 15 centimeters or 6 inches from beak to tail. The smallest of all living owl species is the elf owl from North America. These diminutive birds are themselves around the same size as the previously mentioned falconets, barely 15 centimeters long and having an average body weight of just over 40 grams. It is truly extraordinary how these species can become so tiny and yet retain many of the behavioural and physical traits that their larger cousins have, though the fossil record indicates that this is not the first time that this has happened in the bird of prey and owl family tree. These are two species both dating from the Eocene epoch, one representing a tiny species of bird of prey known as Parvulivenator, and an early species of tiny owl, Eostrix. Both of these species date from a fairly early stage in the Eocene epoch, roughly 55 million years ago, and their size in fact is even more diminutive than the previously mentioned species of today. Parvulivenator was an ancient relative of modern falcons and the tiny falconets, whom it very closely resembled in life, and only reached around 2/3 the size of modern-day black-thighed and collared falconets. Likewise, Eostrix gulutai, the tiny Eocene owl, was also even smaller than the modern contemporary, the elf owl. Just like their modern counterparts, these two even tinier prehistoric species likely spent most of their time feeding on insects, which were in abundance during this time in Earth's history considering how warm and forested it was, though they may have occasionally tackled very small reptiles and mammals given the chance. Australia currently has no vulture species present on the continent, but we now know that at least one vulture species did inhabit the continent, at least in the distant past. Skeletal material discovered in Australia dating to the Pleistocene epoch were described initially in 1905 as likely being the remains of a species of eagle. However, upon closer examination of these bones, specifically at the leg and foot anatomy of this extinct bird, it soon became clear that the tarsometatarsus, or lower leg bone of this bird, was not very robust in comparison to that of birds of prey like larger eagles that do actively dispatch larger prey, and would have lacked the musculature or strength to do so in real life. Along with other features identified from the bones, it has only been recently that this bird has been identified as not a species of eagle, but in fact an Old World vulture. It has since been given the scientific name Cryptogyps, a reference to its mistaken identity. Scaling of its remains indicate that this vulture was not particularly large, not as big as some other species mentioned on this list, but still somewhat bigger than the largest bird of prey alive in Australia today, the wedge-tailed eagle. Cryptogyps may have had a wingspan of roughly 2 meters or more across, and they were quite robust even for a vulture, though at the same time it was quite a lightweight bird, weighing around 4 to 6 kilograms, which is comparable to the wedge-tailed eagle, but not as heavy as large Old World vultures alive today like the griffon vulture, for example. During the Pleistocene era, this extinct vulture lived alongside a range of bizarre and gigantic Australian megafauna, ranging from the gigantic wombat-like diprotodon to gigantic kangaroos, and of course the infamous megalania, a huge fearsome relative of modern-day Komodo dragons. There was also another large bird of prey, the predatory Dinatoatus, which itself was related to modern-day Old World vultures, but lived more like a large eagle. With so many megafauna around, including some especially fearsome predators, it seems there was no shortage of carrion in which Cryptogyps could feed on, fulfilling a scavenging role much like modern species of Old World vultures in the Serengeti today. Flores is located in Indonesia amongst an archipelago of islands including the famous Komodo Islands. This isolated and tropical location was historically home to a range of unusual animals, including yet another species of prehistoric vulture. The vulture species endemic to the Flores Islands belong to the genus known as Dryornis, meaning that this species of extinct vulture was very closely related to the modern-day white-headed vulture, which also belongs to this genus. However, the modern-day white-headed vulture is only found across Africa, and is itself a critically endangered species nowadays. The fact that it had such a close relation living on the Flores island in Indonesia suggests that this particular genus of vulture was possibly even more diverse across the southern hemisphere throughout ancient history. During much of the Pleistocene epoch, this particular species of vulture, who may have resembled and behaved almost exactly like the modern-day white-headed vulture, was a primary scavenger on the island, with wingspans sometimes reaching nearly 8 foot across. The island ecosystem in which it lived was home to a range of bizarre creatures. During this time, as still is the case today, the island was home to Komodo dragons as well as other islands nearby, who were both active predators and scavengers. There was another species of extinct bird living here, however, that outclassed possibly even the vulture and the Komodo dragon in certain aspects. A gigantic species of marabou stork, which could have stood nearly 6 foot tall and had a wingspan exceeding 3 meters across, making for an especially formidable competitor. Possibly even stranger still was a species of prehistoric human which lived here, Homo floresiensis. This species of prehistoric human would have barely stood up to 4 foot tall, hence their common nickname, the real-life hobbits. Despite their diminutive size, however, they were still formidable, with evidence of stone tools and blades, alongside evidence that they may have hunted dwarf elephants on the island. One can imagine, however, many of the gigantic inhabitants of this island giving these tiny humans a hard time, especially in contests over hunted kills and other carrion, including with the gigantic marabou storks and the Flores vulture itself. Caracara major was a species of prehistoric Caracara from the Pleistocene epoch, representing possibly one of, if not the largest of its kind. It was named as a new species in 2013, and it lived throughout South America, with its remains specifically being found in Uruguay. Numerous fossils assigned to Caracaras of different species being found in South America indicates that during these prehistoric times, Caracaras were seemingly even more diverse than they are today, but in terms of sheer size, this particular species was a cut above the rest. It is believed that the largest Caracara major individuals may have reached at least up to 4,000 grams in weight, whereas the modern crested Caracara weighs around 1,348 grams on average, making this extinct bird at least 3 to 3.5 times the size of its modern relative, and possibly representing one of the largest prehistoric species in the Falconidae family tree. However, despite its size, this gigantic Caracara seems to have retained its flight capabilities. Unlike another species of extinct Caracara we have covered in a previous video, the Jamaican Caracara, which is believed to have been either near flightless or completely flightless. Caracaras as a species are known to be highly versatile and intelligent birds, being unusually social for a raptor, and being adept at both hunting and catching prey with their powerful taloned feet, but also being adept scavengers of carrion. It seems therefore that Caracara major may have both hunted and scavenged prey in much the same manner as its modern relatives, just on a larger scale, with the presence of large megafauna and therefore larger amounts of food, likely being the main contributing factor in enabling this bird to reach such a great size. However, since the discovery and description of Caracara major in 2013, a new fossil taxon of Caracara belonging to the same genus as this one has also been found in Uruguay since, and it has been described to be larger than even Caracara major itself. The tiny island of Reunion is situated in the Indian Ocean, near the much larger and more famous island of Madagascar, where it was once home to a small species of falcon known as the Reunion kestrel. Endemic only to this tiny island, this species was part of a group of numerous other kestrels which radiated and diversified across different locations in the Indian Ocean. With a wingspan of around 70 centimeters, it likely closely resembled other kestrel species in size and coloration, including the familiar common kestrel. It had comparatively more rounded wings than many other kestrels, however, making it a more maneuverable fly in its forested habitat. This species is well recognized from subfossil bones located on the island, as well as writings from Sieur de Bois, a French traveller who observed this bird alive and published these writings in 1674. As a small species of falcon, this bird fed mainly on other smaller birds, but it also fed largely on insects, as well as a small reptile endemic to the island, the Reunion Island day gecko, though Dubois mentioned that despite its small size, this raptor would sometimes attack domestic chickens. The exact cause of extinction of the Reunion Island kestrel is somewhat mysterious, as introduced predators were not present at the time that this bird was last observed, with even invasive species like rats posing relatively little problem for these birds. While this species was considered to be a pest by some at the time, as they did occasionally hunt poultry, it seems also unlikely that persecution was the main cause of extinction, as other species present on the island were also heavily persecuted, and yet they still survive to this day. Whatever the exact cause or causes of extinction, the Reunion Island kestrel seems to have died out around the year 1700. Next to the island of Reunion, however, is another tiny island, the island of Mauritius, which is home to another species of small falcon with a more positive continuation to its species story. Mauritius is itself the famous former home of a very infamous extinct species, the dodo, a large flightless species of ground-dwelling pigeon, which itself died out around the time, if not before, the Reunion kestrel itself died out on the nearby island. Mauritius has its own kestrel species endemic to its land, however, the Mauritius kestrel, which is slightly smaller than the Reunion kestrel was, but otherwise is physically very similar. This particular species of kestrel had already suffered a serious population decline during the 18th century as a result of deforestation and intense cyclones. However, during the 1950s and 60s, it suffered an even more serious decline as a result of indiscriminate DDT use, a type of pesticide, as well as the introduction of various invasive species including rats, mongooses, crab-eating macaques, and possibly the most serious of all, feral cats. These invasive species contributed to the decline by competing for the kestrel for habitat and resources, as well as sometimes actively predating the kestrels and their eggs themselves, particularly in the case of mongooses and feral cats. The population of this bird hit an all-time low in 1974, with only 4 individuals recorded on the island, making this species the rarest bird in the world at the time. To prevent the species from dying out, a wildlife sanctuary was set up on the island and a serious conservation effort began to take place. It turns out that alongside other kestrel species, the Mauritius kestrel is capable of starting a new clutch of eggs if the first clutch fails. A technique known as double clutching was quickly implemented to boost the population as fast as possible, where a clutch of eggs was located and then removed to be raised in captivity, while the diet of the kestrels themselves was being supplemented while the second clutch in the wild was being raised, thus averting any potential negative impacts on the wild population. Thanks to these intensive conservation efforts, the population of Mauritius kestrels has been steadily increasing over the last few decades, and they have since been moved from critically endangered to endangered on the species conservation list. There are currently around 300 to 400 individuals alive in Mauritius today, which, although not seeming to sound that much, is still an important increase in population considering these birds live on such a tiny island, but conservation efforts are still in place to try and maintain and increase the population even further. It just goes to show that with proper knowledge and quick intervention, these species can be saved from the brink of extinction.